In 1250 AD, as the first true winter winds swept across the sea ice near what is now Victoria Island, Thule hunter Kalin faced a problem that could decide the fate of his entire Saida. Traditional stone and bone houses were warm, but fixed. They tied families to land while the seals, their lifeblood, moved with the shifting ice. Kalin wanted something radical, a winter home built entirely of snow, light enough to move with the hunt, yet warm enough to survive the Arctic night. For years he experimented, testing snow densities, carving spiral domes, studying how cold air pooled and warm air rose. His breakthrough came when he combined three principles: a deep, cold trap floor, a raised sleeping platform, and a snow dome shaped to capture every bit of heat from bodies, and a single flickering quillic. The result was astonishing, a snow chamber that held warmth even in 40°C storms. But when a sudden warm spell threatened to melt everything, Kalin pushed the design further, creating breathing walls that vented moisture and stabilized the structure. How did one hunter transform snow into a self-heating winter machine and reshape Arctic survival for generations? Part 1. The year is 1250 AD, precisely the autumn of September 20th. The place is a vast, frozen expanse of sea ice in the Canadian Arctic, near what would one day be called Victoria Island, a world of white and blue, of silence and wind. The Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit, are in the midst of their great eastward expansion, a centuries-long migration that has taken them from the shores of Alaska to the coast of Greenland. They are a people of the sea, a people of the ice, a people who have learned to live in harmony with one of the most extreme environments on Earth. It is late autumn, a time of transition, of preparation for the long, dark winter that lies ahead. The sun, a pale, distant disk, hangs low on the horizon, its weak rays casting long, ghostly shadows across the snow. The sea ice, which had been a shifting, dynamic landscape of open water and floating floes, is now a solid, unbroken sheet of white. The air is cold, a dry, biting cold that seeps into the bones and freezes the breath. On a small, wind-swept island, a group of Thule hunters are making their winter camp. They are a small band, a Sida, of 3 families, led by a man named Kalin. Born on March 15, 1210, at 40 years old, Kalin is a master hunter, a man who has spent his life on the ice, a man who knows the ways of the seal, the walrus, the bowhead whale. His father, Amaruk, had been a great whaling captain, and Umialik, who had led successful hunts from 1180 until his death in 1235. His grandfather, Tulugak, had been among the first Thule people to migrate east from Alaska in 1150, part of the great expansion that would eventually reach Greenland. He is a man of few words, a man whose authority comes not from his voice, but from his actions, from his deep, intuitive understanding of the natural world. Kalin is a man of vision, a man who is not content to simply follow the old ways. He is a man who is always looking for new ways to improve, to innovate, to make life better for his family and his community. And now, as the threat of another harsh winter looms, he is consumed by a single, all-encompassing obsession: to build a snow house, an igloo, that can stay warm with almost no fuel. The traditional winter shelters of the Thule were semi-subterranean houses, built of stone, whalebone, and turf. These houses, which were often large and communal, were warm and comfortable, but they were also permanent. They were built on land, and they tied the people to a single location for the entire winter. But Kalin has a different vision. He has a vision of a winter camp on the sea ice itself, a camp that is mobile, a camp that can follow the movements of the seals, the primary source of food and fuel for his people. He has heard stories, passed down from his ancestors, of a different kind of snow house, a house built entirely of snow, a house that is light, strong, and incredibly warm. He has heard stories of the Dorset people, the Tunayat, the people who had inhabited this land before the Thule, the people who had known the secrets of building with snow. But the Dorset are gone now, their knowledge lost to the mists of time. Kalen is determined to rediscover that knowledge. He is determined to unlock the secrets of the snow. He has spent the past few winters, from November 1247 to April 1249, experimenting with different types of snow, different building techniques. On December 3rd, 1247, he had built his first experimental snow house, a small structure that collapsed after only 3 days. On January 15th, 1248, he had tried a different approach, using larger blocks and a steeper angle, but the house had been too cold, the temperature inside barely warmer than the outside. On February 20th, 1248, he had experimented with different types of snow, discovering that the wind-packed snow from deep drifts had a density of approximately 400 kilograms per cubic meter, compared to only 100 kilograms per cubic meter for freshly fallen snow. On March 10, 1249, he had finally succeeded in building a small snow house that remained standing for an entire month, but it had still been too cold for comfortable habitation. He has learned that not all snow is the same. He has learned that the best snow for building is the hard, wind-packed snow that is found in deep drifts. He has learned that this snow, which the Inuit call pukak, has a unique crystalline structure that makes it both strong and light. He has learned how to cut this snow into blocks using a long, thin knife made of bone. He has learned how to stack these blocks in a spiral, each block leaning on the one below it to create a self-supporting dome. But he has also learned that building a snow house is not enough. A snow house, no matter how well built, is still just a shell. It is a shelter from the wind, but it is not a home. A home needs warmth, it needs light, it needs a soul. And in the Arctic, warmth is life. Kalen is convinced that the secret to a warm snow house lies not in the fire, but in the design. He has observed that the traditional Thule winter houses, with their sunken entrances and raised sleeping platforms, are designed to trap heat. He has observed that the smoke from the kolik, the stone lamp that is the heart of every Inuit home, rises to the ceiling, creating a layer of warm air that insulates the living space. He has observed that the cold air, which is heavier than the warm air, sinks to the floor and is trapped in the entrance tunnel. He is determined to apply these principles to his new snow house design. He is determined to create a snow house that is not just a dome, but a sophisticated thermal machine, a machine that can capture and store the heat from the bodies of its occupants, from the small flickering flame of a single kulik, and use that heat to create a warm, comfortable living space. His obsession has not gone unnoticed. The other hunters in his Sida, who have always respected him for his skill and his knowledge, are now beginning to question his sanity. They see him spending hours studying the snow, measuring the temperature of the air, drawing strange, circular diagrams on a piece of sealskin. They see him as a man who is chasing a dream that is both impractical and dangerous. They are content with the old ways, with the tried and true methods that have sustained their people for generations. They are afraid of the new, the unknown, the untested. Even his own wife, Ilara, born on August 8, 1215, is beginning to worry. She is a woman of great strength and wisdom, a woman who has borne 3 children and survived countless Arctic winters. She sees the fire in his eyes, the passion in his voice, but she also sees the toll that his obsession is taking on him. He is not sleeping, he is not eating, he is consumed by his work. On September 25th, she had found him outside at 2 a.m., measuring the temperature of the snow by moonlight, his fingers nearly frozen. On October 5th, he had forgotten to eat for an entire day, so absorbed was he in his calculations. On October 10th, she had watched him spend 6 hours carving a single block of snow, perfecting the angle, the shape, the texture. She is afraid that he is leading them down a dangerous path, a path that will end in disaster. She remembers the stories of her grandmother, who had told her of a hunter named Nanook, who had become obsessed with hunting a great white bear, and who had died in the pursuit, leaving his family to starve. But Kalin is not deterred. He is a man on a mission, a man with a vision. He is a man who believes that he can make a difference, that he can change the world, one snow house at a time. And as the first stars of the long polar night begin to appear in the sky, he is ready to put his ideas to the test. He is ready to build a snow house that will not just survive the winter, but conquer it. He is ready to build a snow house that will be a beacon of hope for his people, a testament to the power of human ingenuity, a symbol of a new way of living in harmony with the ice. Part 2. The work of building the new snow house began on October 15, 1250, at precisely 8 a.m. when the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon. The site that Kalin had chosen was a large, deep snowdrift on the leeward side of the island, a drift that had accumulated over the previous 3 winters. The snow was perfect, hard, and wind-packed, with a fine, granular texture and a density of 420 kilograms per cubic meter. The first task was to mark out the circle of the house, a circle 5 meters in diameter. Kalin did this with a long piece of braided sealskin rope, measuring exactly 2.5 meters, one end anchored in the center of the circle with a bone stake, the other end used to trace the circumference in the snow. He marked the circumference with a series of small flags made of caribou fur, spaced at intervals of 50 centimeters. Once the circle was marked, the work of cutting the blocks began at 9 a.m. on October 15th. Kalin used a long, thin knife made of caribou antler, a tool that he had fashioned himself over the summer of 1250, specifically on July 22nd. The knife was 45 centimeters long, with a blade that was 3 centimeters wide and sharpened to a fine edge. The blocks were cut from inside the circle, each block measuring approximately 90 centimeters long, 40 centimeters high, and 20 centimeters thick. The blocks weighed approximately 15 kilograms each. By cutting the blocks from inside the circle, the floor of the house would be lower than the surrounding snow by approximately 50 centimeters. This was the first principle of Kalin's new design, the cold trap. The cold air, which was heavier than the warm air, would sink into the lower part of the house, leaving the upper part, the living space, relatively warm. He had calculated that this design would create a temperature differential of at least 10 degrees Celsius between the floor and the sleeping platform. The blocks were cut in a continuous spiral, each block slightly wedge-shaped, with the inner edge approximately 2 centimeters narrower than the outer edge, so that they would fit together to form a dome. The work was slow and painstaking. Each block had to be cut with precision. Each block had to be placed with care. The first few rows were easy, completed by noon on October 15th. But as the walls grew higher, the work became more difficult. By October 18th, the walls had reached a height of 1.5 meters, and the blocks had to be lifted into place, requiring the assistance of 2 hunters. The angle of the walls had to be carefully controlled, tilted inward at approximately 15 degrees from vertical. A mistake at this stage could be disastrous, causing the entire structure to collapse. On October 20th, one block was placed incorrectly, and a section of the wall sagged. Kalin had to carefully remove 3 blocks, and rebuild that section, a process that took 4 hours. The sound of the knife cutting through the snow was a rhythmic, almost musical sound, a soft, crunching whisper that echoed across the frozen landscape. The smell of the snow was clean and pure, with a faint metallic tang that spoke of the extreme cold. Kalen worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He was a master of his craft, his movements economical and precise. He seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the properties of the snow, of the way it would behave under pressure, of the way it would respond to the gentle persuasion of his knife. The other hunters watched him with a mixture of awe and skepticism. They had never seen a snow house built like this before. They had never seen a man work with such confidence, such mastery. As the walls of the dome neared completion on October 22nd, Kalen began to work on the second principle of his new design, the raised sleeping platform. He built a platform of compacted snow at the back of the house, a platform that was a full meter above the floor and measured 3 meters wide by 2 meters deep. The platform was constructed from blocks of snow that were even more tightly packed than the walls, with a density of approximately 500 kilograms per cubic meter. This was the living space, the place where the families would sleep, eat, and work. The platform was large enough to accommodate all 3 families, a total of 10 people, with a small space in the center for the kulik, the stone lamp that would be the only source of heat and light in the house. The kulik was a shallow soapstone bowl, 30 centimeters in diameter, filled with seal oil and fitted with a wick made of dried moss. When lit, the kulik produced approximately 200 watts of heat, equivalent to 2 large candles. The final task was to cut the entrance tunnel, which Kalen began on October 23rd at 9 a.m. The tunnel was long and narrow, measuring 2 meters in length, 80 centimeters in width, and 1 meter in height. It sloped downwards at an angle of 10 degrees so that the entrance was 20 centimeters lower than the floor of the house. This was the third principle of Kalen's new design, the cold sink. The cold air from outside, which was denser than the warm air inside, would be trapped in the tunnel, prevented by its own weight from rising into the living space. The entrance was covered with a block of snow, which could be moved aside to allow people to enter and exit. The block weighed approximately 20 kilograms and was fitted with a small handle made of braided sealskin rope. Finally, on October 25th, 1250, the house was finished. It was a beautiful, elegant structure, a perfect white dome against the pale blue of the Arctic sky. It was a testament to Kalen's skill, his vision, his unwavering determination. But the real test was yet to come. The real test would be to see if his house could truly stay warm with almost no fuel. Kalen and the other 2 families moved into the new house. They brought with them their sleeping skins, their cooking pots, their tools, their weapons. They lit the kulik, its small flickering flame casting a warm, gentle glow on the smooth white walls of the snow house. They sat on the raised sleeping platform, the warmth from the lamp and from their own bodies rising to the ceiling, creating a pocket of warm air in the upper part of the house. They looked at each other, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension. They waited. They waited for the winter to come. They waited to see if their new home would be a sanctuary or a tomb. Part 3. The first few weeks in the new snow house were a revelation. The winter of 1250-1251 began with a ferocity that was unusual even for the Arctic. Kalen had installed a primitive thermometer, a sealed caribou bladder filled with water, on October 26th, which allowed him to track the temperature changes. On November 1st, the temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius. On November 5th, it dropped to minus 25. On November 8th, it reached minus 35. The first major blizzard arrived on November 10th at 3 p.m., a swirling, blinding storm of wind and snow that lasted for 3 days and 2 nights. The temperature plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius, and the wind, which Kalin estimated to be blowing at 60 kilometers per hour, howled like a pack of hungry wolves. The wind chill factor made the effective temperature feel like -60 degrees Celsius. In the traditional Thule winter houses, which were built on land, the people were safe and warm, but they were also trapped. They could not go out to hunt, and their supplies of food and fuel were limited. But in Kalin's snow house, it was a different world. The house was a small, self-contained universe, a pocket of warmth and light in the midst of the raging storm. The temperature inside the house, on the raised sleeping platform, remained at a comfortable 10 degrees Celsius, even when the temperature outside was 50 degrees colder. Kalin measured the temperature at different locations within the house on November 11th at 6 p.m. On the floor, near the entrance, the temperature was -5 degrees Celsius. In the entrance tunnel, it was -15 degrees, but on the raised sleeping platform, where the families lived, it was a comfortable 10 degrees. At the apex of the dome, where the warm air accumulated, it was 12 degrees. The snow walls, which were 20 centimeters thick, had an inner surface temperature of 0 degrees Celsius, while the outer surface was -40 degrees, creating a temperature gradient of 40 degrees across just 20 centimeters of snow. The small, flickering flame of the kulik, which burned seal oil, was enough to keep the living space warm. The heat from the lamp and from the bodies of the 10 people who lived in the house was trapped in the upper part of the dome, while the cold air was trapped in the lower part of the house and in the entrance tunnel. The house was a marvel of thermal engineering, a perfect example of how a deep understanding of the principles of heat transfer could be used to create a comfortable living space in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Kalin had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He had created a house that was not just a shelter, but a home that was warm, comfortable, and sustainable. But the winter was far from over, and Kalin's new design was about to face a new, unexpected challenge. The blizzard had been a test of the house's ability to withstand the cold. But what would happen when the weather turned warm? On December 1st, 1250, at approximately 10 a.m., a strange, unseasonable warm spell swept across the Arctic, a phenomenon that Kalin had never witnessed in his 40 years of life. The temperature rose from -30 degrees Celsius to -2 degrees Celsius in just 6 hours, a rate of temperature increase of nearly 5 degrees per hour. By December 2nd at noon, the temperature had reached 0 degrees Celsius, exactly at the freezing point of water. The wind died down to less than 5 kilometers per hour, creating an eerie, unnatural calm. The sun, which had been absent for weeks, made a brief, watery appearance on the horizon on December 2nd at 2 p.m., its pale light reflecting off the wet snow. The snow, which had been dry and powdery with a moisture content of less than 5%, became wet and heavy with a moisture content that Kalin estimated to be over 30%. The density of the snow increased from 420 kilograms per cubic meter to over 600 kilograms per cubic meter. In Kalin's snow house, the effect was immediate. The walls of the house, which had been so strong and solid, began to melt. Water dripped from the ceiling, soaking the sleeping skins, the clothing, the food. The air, which had been so dry and clean, was now damp and musty. The house, which had been a sanctuary, was now a damp, uncomfortable, and unhealthy place to live. The crisis came to a head on December 5th, 1250. The temperature rose to 0 degrees Celsius, and the melting accelerated. The walls of the house were now saturated with water, and the structure was beginning to weaken. The dome, which had been so strong and stable, was now in danger of collapsing. The families were forced to move their belongings to the center of the house, away from the dripping walls. They huddled together on the sleeping platform, their bodies cold and damp, their spirits low. Kalen was a man in turmoil. He had been so focused on the problem of keeping the house warm that he had not considered the problem of keeping it dry. He had created a house that was perfectly adapted to the cold, but not to the warmth. He had made a fatal miscalculation, and now his family and his community were paying the price. On December 5th, at 8 p.m., his youngest son, Arnak, just 5 years old, born on May 3rd, 1245, began to cough violently, his small body racked with spasms. His daughter, Siku, born on November 12th, 1242, now 8 years old, was shivering uncontrollably, her lips blue with cold. Ilara looked at him with eyes that held not anger, but a deep, profound sadness. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her silence was more devastating than any words could have been. Kalen felt the weight of his failure crushing down on him, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. He had been so arrogant, so sure of himself. He had thought he could outsmart nature, that he could bend the Arctic to his will. But nature does not bend. Nature does not forgive. Nature simply is. As the water dripped from the ceiling, as the walls of the house sagged under the weight of the water, Kalen was forced to confront the bitter truth. His house was not a perfect machine. It was a flawed, imperfect creation, a creation that was vulnerable to the unpredictable, ever-changing moods of the Arctic weather. He had conquered the cold, but he had been defeated by the warmth. Part 4. The melting continued for 2 days. The temperature remained at 0 degrees Celsius, and the snow continued to melt. In Kalen's snow house, the situation was dire. The walls were saturated with water, and the dome was visibly sagging. The families were huddled together on the sleeping platform, their bodies cold and damp, their spirits low. The children were coughing, their small, frail bodies susceptible to the damp cold. Ilara, Kalen's wife, looked at him with a mixture of fear and disappointment. She had believed in him. She had believed in his dream. But now it seemed that his dream was turning into a nightmare. Kalen was a man on the edge. He had failed. He had failed his family. He had failed his community. He had been so arrogant, so sure of himself, so convinced that he had all the answers. And now his arrogance had led them to this. He looked at his wife and children, their faces pale, their lips blue with cold. He felt a wave of guilt and despair wash over him, so powerful that it threatened to drown him. But then, as he sat there in the damp, cold house on the night of December 5th at approximately 11 p.m., something shifted inside him. A small, flickering ember of hope, of defiance, began to glow in the depths of his despair. He looked at his children, at their small, vulnerable faces, and he felt a surge of protective love so powerful that it drove out the fear, the guilt, the despair. He was a builder, a man who had spent his life working with his hands, a man who knew how to solve problems. He would not give up. He would not let his family suffer. He would find a way. He remembered the words of his father, Amaruk, spoken on his deathbed on October 20th, 1235. "The ice does not care about your plans, my son. The ice does not care about your cleverness. The ice only respects those who listen, those who learn, those who adapt." Kalen had not been listening. He had been, too, busy imposing his will, his vision, his design. But now, in this moment of crisis, he was ready to listen. He was ready to learn from the snow itself. He got up and began to pace the room, his mind racing. He had to find a way to stop the melting. He had to find a way to dry out the house. He had to find a way to make his snow house resilient to the unpredictable whims of the Arctic weather. He looked at the dripping walls, at the sagging dome, at the pools of water on the floor. He looked at the kullik, its small flame still burning, a symbol of hope in the darkness. And then he saw it. He saw the one thing that he had overlooked, the one thing that he had taken for granted. He saw the air that was trapped in the snow, the air that was the secret to the snow's insulating properties, the air that was also the source of its vulnerability. He remembered his experiments with different types of snow. He remembered that the best snow for building was the hard, wind-packed snow, the pukak, which had a unique crystalline structure that trapped air in tiny pockets. He remembered that this trapped air was what made the snow such a good insulator. But he also remembered that when the snow melted, the air escaped, and the insulation was lost. He realized that the problem was not the snow itself, but the way it was being used. He had built a solid dome of snow, a dome that was designed to be a monolithic structure. But the snow was not a monolithic material. It was a porous material, a material that was full of air. And when the air escaped, the snow lost its strength, its insulating properties, its very essence. He needed to find a way to keep the air trapped in the snow, even when the snow was melting. He needed to find a way to create a double-layered wall, a wall that would have an air gap between the layers. He needed to find a way to create a snow house that could breathe. He grabbed his caribou antler knife and began to cut at 2 p.m. on December 6th. He cut a series of small horizontal slits in the inner surface of the igloo walls, just above the sleeping platform. Each slit was 5 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide, spaced at intervals of 20 centimeters. He then cut a series of vertical slits, each 10 centimeters long, connecting the horizontal ones, creating a network of small, interconnected air channels. The total surface area of the air channels was approximately 0.5 square meters. He then instructed the other hunters to do the same, working quickly and carefully, their movements precise and coordinated. By 5 p.m. on December 6th, they had completed the network of air channels throughout the entire inner surface of the dome. He then cut a small vent at the apex of the dome, a circular opening 10 centimeters in diameter, which would allow the warm, moist air to escape. It was a desperate, unconventional solution, a solution born of necessity and intuition. But it worked. As the warm, moist air from the living space rose, it entered the air channels in the inner wall. The cold air from the outer wall, which was still frozen at -5 degrees Celsius, drew the warm air upwards, creating a natural convection current. Kalin estimated that the air was moving through the channels at a velocity of approximately 0.5 meters per second. The warm air, as it rose, carried with it the moisture from the melting snow and released it through the small vent at the top of the dome. By December 7th at 8 a.m., Kalin measured the moisture content of the inner wall and found it had decreased from 30% to less than 10%. The outer layer of snow, which was still frozen, remained intact, providing a protective barrier against the elements. The inner layer, which was now dry, regained its insulating properties. The temperature on the sleeping platform, which had dropped to 5 degrees Celsius during the crisis, rose back to 10 degrees Celsius by December 7th at noon. It was not much, but it was enough. It was enough to stop the melting, it was enough to dry out the house, it was enough to keep them warm. For the rest of the warm spell, they lived like this, a small, huddled island of warmth and dryness in a sea of dampness. They lived on dried meat and fish. They drank melted snow. They slept in short, fitful bursts. They waited for the warm spell to end. On December 7th, the temperature finally dropped. The wind picked up, and the snow began to fall again. The world was a sea of white, a vast, silent, frozen landscape. Kalen emerged from the house, his body aching, his mind numb with exhaustion. He looked at the snow-covered dome, at the small vent at the top, at the network of air channels that he had carved into the walls. He had survived. His family had survived. He had faced the worst that the Arctic could throw at him, and he had won. He had won, not because of his clever design, not because of his modern ideas, but because of his connection to the earth, his understanding of the ancient primal forces of nature. He had won because in his moment of greatest need, he had been able to let go of his pride, his arrogance, his intellectual certainty, and to embrace a simpler, more intuitive way of knowing. He had won because he had learned to listen to the wisdom of the snow. Part 5. The winter of 1250-1251 was a turning point for Kalen and for his people. The story of how he had built a snow house that could withstand both the extreme cold and the unseasonable warmth spread like wildfire across the Arctic. By January 15th, 1251, hunters from 3 neighboring siedas had traveled to visit Kalen's camp, a journey of over 50 kilometers across the frozen sea ice. By February 20th, 1251, representatives from 7 different Thule communities had come to see the breathing snow house with their own eyes. By March 30th, 1251, when the spring thaw began, over 20 master builders had learned Kalen's techniques. The other hunters, who had once been so skeptical, now looked at him with a new respect, a new admiration. They saw him not as a fool, but as a visionary, a man who had found a way to live in harmony with the harsh, unforgiving environment of the ice. In the spring, when the sea ice began to break up on April 25th, 1251, and the people returned to their summer camps on the land, a delegation of hunters from other saidas came to see Kalen. The delegation arrived on May 10th, 1251, consisting of 12 master builders from communities as far away as 200 kilometers. They asked him to teach them his new building techniques. They asked him to help them build their own breathing snow houses, their own mobile winter camps on the ice. Kalen, who had been humbled by his experience, agreed. He spent the summer of 1251 from June 1st to September 15th, working with his fellow hunters, sharing his knowledge, his skills, his vision. He taught them how to identify the best snow, how to cut blocks with the proper dimensions, how to create the spiral structure, how to build the raised sleeping platform, how to carve the air channels, how to install the ventilation system. By the end of the summer, on September 15th, 1251, over 50 hunters had been trained in Kalen's techniques. He taught them how to build with pukak, how to create the cold trap, the cold sink, the raised sleeping platform. He taught them how to carve the air channels, how to create the breathing wall, how to make a snow house that was not just a shelter, but a living, breathing part of the natural world. Over the next few years, the new design spread throughout the Thule world with remarkable speed. By the winter of 1251-1252, over 100 breathing snow houses had been built across the Canadian Arctic. By the winter of 1255-1256, the number had grown to over 500. By the winter of 1260-1261, the breathing snow house had become the standard winter shelter for Thule hunters living on the sea ice. The old, permanent winter houses, which had tied the people to a single location, were gradually replaced by the new mobile snow houses, which allowed the people to follow the movements of the seals, to live a more nomadic, more flexible, more sustainable way of life. Archaeological evidence from sites excavated in the 20th century, specifically from excavations conducted between 1965 and 1983, confirmed that this transition occurred rapidly, with a marked increase in temporary hunting camps on the sea ice dating from the mid-13th century. The new design was a revolution, a paradigm shift, a quantum leap in the evolution of Arctic architecture. It was a technology that was perfectly adapted to the environment, a technology that was born of a deep, intuitive understanding of the principles of nature. Kalen's reputation as a master builder spread far and wide. He became a teacher, a mentor, a leader. By 1270, at the age of 60, he had trained over 200 hunters in his techniques. By 1280, when he was 70 years old, his breathing snowhouse design had been adopted by Thule communities from Alaska to Greenland, a distance of over 5,000 kilometers. He never forgot the lessons he had learned during the great warm spell of December 1250. He never forgot the humility, the respect, the deep, abiding connection to the snow that had saved him and his family. He continued to experiment, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible. In 1275, he developed an improved ventilation system using a series of small holes arranged in a spiral pattern. In 1282, he experimented with double-layered sleeping platforms to provide even better insulation. But he always did so with a sense of humility, a sense of reverence for the ancient wisdom of his ancestors, for the timeless, elemental forces of nature. He died on January 10th, 1290, at the age of 80, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, in a breathing snow house of his own design. In the year 1300, specifically in the summer of June 15th, a group of Thule hunters, descendants of Kalen's Siida, reached the shores of Greenland near what is now Connacht. They were among the first Thule people to establish permanent settlements on this vast, icy island. The migration had taken 50 years, spanning 2 generations, with intermediate settlements established on Ellesmere Island in 1275 and Devon Island in 1285. They brought with them the knowledge of how to build the breathing snow house, the knowledge that had been passed down through the generations, the knowledge that had been born of Kalen's vision, his courage, his unwavering determination. By 1350, Thule settlements had spread along the entire western coast of Greenland. By 1400, they had reached the southern tip of Greenland and had begun to establish contact with the Norse settlers who had arrived from Iceland in the 10th century. They built their snow houses on the shores of Greenland, and they thrived. They became the ancestors of the modern Greenlandic Inuit, a people who have lived in harmony with the ice for 1,000 years. And so, the legacy of Kalen, the master builder of the Arctic, lived on. It lived on in the warm, comfortable snow houses of his people. It lived on in the stories and the songs that were passed down from generation to generation. It lived on in the hearts and minds of all who believed that it was possible to live in a way that was both beautiful and sustainable, both modern and timeless,